White, and I am the president of the Maryland Black Chamber of Commerce, and we welcome you to our series. This series is put on by our Financial Industries Affinity Group, and that Financial Industries Affinity Group is responsible for programming once a month with the Maryland Black Chamber of Commerce. So as part of that series, we welcome today Trevor Allen, who is the district manager for ADP, and he's going to be presenting to us the Small Business Guide to Human Capital Management. And with that, Trevor, thank you for your presentation today in advance, and thank you for the partnership that we have with ADP, and looking forward to great things. So with that, I'll hand it on over to you for the next 55 minutes.
All right, perfect. I appreciate that. Let me make sure I can share. Or Melissa, if you need me to,
I'm getting a note saying I have to make you able to share. So hold on, here I go.
Okay, not
I was
problem,
talking and not looking at the chat. Okay, there you go.
That's not a problem at all. Well, I do appreciate the time. Yep, and I got access. Perfect. All right, 1 second here. But hello, everybody. Let's go ahead and looks like get the technology all situated. But yeah, so we're really here to talk about the not so fun stuff, I suppose. You know, I think every small business owner gets into business. And let me just make sure everybody can see that. Can I get a verbal yes from you, Ken? If you can see that, okay?
We have what we see is now we see it. Now we see it.
Okay, I guess takes a little bit to load. Perfect. So, yeah. So when it comes to small businesses, you know, I'm somewhat uniquely primed to speak on the back office things, simply because my years at ADP, I've worked with owner only S corps that do consulting, all the way up to franchises that own coffee shops from here to California. So that all being said, if you pay at least one other person that's not yourself, you're going to have to know about human capital management, or human resources is more of a specialized section under that. So basically what I want to go through today is, first, a disclaimer. I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. My words are not final on this topic. I have my FPC, my fundamental payroll certification, but I'm not licensed with SHRM. I'm not a CPA. So that all being said, this is coming from a fellow member of the Maryland Black Chamber of Commerce, who just happens to be years in this industry and especially work with small businesses in our geographical area. So somewhat, I see it a lot. I work with it a lot. And, ADP provides us with a number of different collaterals and presentations like this where we can pass that information along, which is why I'm very happy to speak to you all today. And I'm very happy for the partnership, Ken. Thank you again. And also, lastly, this is not a commercial for ADP. I might only mention our products at the very, very end briefly. And, and obviously some things that you're going to see here today, maybe for the first time, maybe reinforced, or I'd also, maybe take note and, consult with any business partners, mentors, CPAs, or lawyers before taking, any final action as well. So protecting myself there and just go through the agenda. So first, we'll just talk about, what human resources is, why it's important. Then we'll go into hiring, the importance of an employee handbook, do's and don'ts, company culture, and then lastly, we'll quickly touch on benefits because, again, I will keep that relatively vague since I'm not licensed in retirement, workers' compensation, not licensed in health insurance, things like that. Then it kind of branches off. So the title today was Human Resources 101 at a glance, because every business is different. Every business requires specialized things. And, we want to keep it relatively vague, but also going into the key factors there. Sound good? All right. Now, I can't see the chat, so I'm going to reply. I'm going to depend on you. If someone has a question and needs me to stop or go back or something like that, if you don't mind just kind of interjecting, because my screen is is the full screen of the deck here. Does that sound good?
We'll just, Melissa will help us out.
Perfect. Yeah. So somebody shout. Okay. All right. And I promise this will be informative. I can't guarantee that. I can't guarantee it'll be entertaining for all, but I have been known to crack a joke once or twice throughout one of these as well. So if you have a question, please feel free to throw it in the chat or even come off mute. I don't want this to be me talking at you the whole time, but I do want everybody to take away something from this. So as I mentioned before, I'll use an example, right? One thing they taught us, I think my first business class at Florida State, we're talking about what is business, why small business. They say most business owners go and have a passion, right? For example, they use a bakery. Now to think about it, they use that bakery a lot at our business courses, but they use a baker will go into business, maybe they have an undying passion for baking. They maybe love their craft. Maybe there's more art for them, right? Then they open up their own bakery. Now everything else comes into place, right? They have employees. They have to deal with the hiring. They have to deal with onboarding. They have to deal with firing, disciplinary actions, and everything in between, right? So this is the reason for this webinar today, is to talk about everything in between. The hire to fire, human capital management, and human resources, to be more specific. So, as far as what is human resources, that's everything in between. Why is it important? Because ultimately, as much as you want to, you can't do everything by yourself. And especially, a business that's looking to scale, a business that's looking to succeed, you're going to need your team, and you're going to need to make sure you have the right people in place, make sure they're successful, and you make sure that they're taken care of. But also you have to make sure that, they're doing the right job for the right amount. So going into that, let's go quickly into hiring. Typically, that's the first step for most people. So we'll have some hiring do's, we'll have some hiring don'ts. I may skip through some of these slides quickly because there's a bunch of them, and some of them may seem self-explanatory, but we'll touch on those deeper if you want me to dive deeper into those. Okay. So you're ready to hire, right? Say if you just open, or some of you all, it's 2024. Beginning of the year, maybe some people are realigning their business structures and say, hey, I'm taking the next step now. We got 5, let's get to 10 by the end of the year, right? It's just me. Maybe let me hire a couple of W-2 to 1099s, right? So wherever you are in your business journey, hiring, you can't escape it. So first thing you want to do is review and update your job descriptions. Now, believe it or not, there is a level of legality here. As I mentioned, I'm not a lawyer, but in my experience in working with a lot of small businesses, you want to make sure that you want to be as detailed as possible here, right? For example, you may have seen job descriptions, in the past, previous jobs, where it says, make sure you're able to live 50 pounds, right? I've interviewed with places where I'm doing a sales job. Why do I need to live 50 pounds, right? They do that to protect yourself, because you want to make sure that no one can in turn sue or be litigious against your business for saying that, hey, I didn't agree to do this and they're having me do this, or threatening to fire me if I don't do this. Well, look at your job description, right? So you want to make sure you, one, include exactly what the job is going to be, define essential and non-essential roles, if there are necessary knowledges, skills, or abilities or certifications that are required in the job description, you want to make sure that's there as well. So one, it protects you first and foremost, but also you want to make sure that people know what they're getting into. All right. And that'll save you a lot of problems down the road. Trust me. You only really hear about job descriptions when it's something comes back to buy businesses.
Trevor, can I stop you real quick? There are some strange little emo posts that are popping up. Is that part of the presentation?
Oh, let me see if I can. Are you talking about the WebEx notifications? Yeah, let me see if I can get rid of that.
Looks like emails.
I think that's because I had, I had just the presentation. 1 second. Sorry about that, y'all. Yeah, never able to turn those off from our internal communication system. And sorry about that, everybody.
I'm okay if you're okay. I didn't want something to pop up that you didn't want us to see.
Those are internal conversations.
And then Trevor,
Uh,
real quick, we have a question. Will the participants get a copy of the slides?
I can send this out. Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Back on track. Can you see that okay, Ken?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So, like I said, I may be moving through some of these quickly, but second due to hiring is you want to make sure you optimize the job itself, right? You want to make sure you're including a brief description of the company, include overview of the roles and responsibilities, and what the last one I want to touch on and emphasize, maybe even consider, some pay transparency. Right. A lot of times, if you have a recruiter doing the hiring for you or a staffing agency or something of that nature, there'll be something, they'll hold the company name and the pay kind of close to the chest until they realize that someone's a qualified candidate. I think some businesses are even going with, a fully open pay transparency there. And while my personal opinion is I'm a fan of it, I can understand, maybe you don't want the wrong people trying to apply if you feel like the role does pay higher than average or vice versa. So, that's something to consider when you're putting your job and making sure you're posting it to the proper places.
Speaking I had a question. So I honestly don't know what this means. What does it mean to have in your job description use inclusive language?
So I think there's a separate slide on that when it comes to the don'ts of hiring, but basically you want to make sure that you're not excluding a certain demographic or group with some of the language you're using, right? That is case by case, but inclusive language is basically inviting. So we'll get into that because there's certain slides, but basically, we'll be an equal opportunity employer. Essentially, you want to make sure that some of the language can include all people of, types of disabilities and races, creeds, and genders and stuff like that.
And I don't want to digress, but this comes up a lot with us as a Maryland Black Chamber. We struggle with what can we actually put in our request? Are we looking for Black interns or can we how do we address that? So interesting. I want to get more information.
Yeah. So from a legal, like I said, from a legal standpoint, you can internally have preferences. I don't think that's anything innately wrong with that. But on the job post itself, you can't say, "Hey, we're looking for a Black female 20 to 25 to fill this role." Like, unless you're a casting agent, right? That can get you in hot water because on the flip side, right? Say if someone said, "Hey, we are looking for white employees under 30 for this role," then everybody can. Then you just makes it very difficult for anybody to apply or get a job at a certain place if that's allowed. So, internally you can necessarily have preferences of what you're looking for, or maybe some people that have been successful in a role. But I think the government is very clear on job descriptions to be very inclusive to all, at least for the application. And then through the interview process, there are things that weed them out outside of race, gender, age, disability, then that's to the hiring managers or the owner's discretion. So that's a tricky one.
Yeah. So Faye, we see your hand, and I guess I went out of protocol. Faye, we see your hand. Go ahead and ask your question. After that, and people put their questions in the chat.
Thank you. I was just wondering, there's such an emphasis on different groups that are segregated in America. And even when you submit an application, there's still an emphasis on the group. Now there's an emphasis on the pronoun. And just to speak to your issue with the Chamber of Commerce, You have an LBGT Chamber of Commerce, you have an Asian American Chamber of Commerce, you have a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, you have obviously the Black Chamber of Commerce. So there's an emphasis on kind of tribalism or community, our separate community. You know, you have the U.S. Women Chamber of Commerce. You have all these various chambers of commerce. And then on applications itself, you have to, at the end of the app, what I've noticed, you have to self-identify, either Black/African American, you know, Caucasian or Native Alaskan, Indian, whatever the case might be. So I guess my question is, it's really not going to go away, this kind of self-segregation, because it's
Yeah.
propagated by policy in America and job creation. They want to say DEI, but yet there's still an emphasis on we're not all Americans. We still have to hyphenate and belong to a certain group. So
I
I
agree with
just
that
think it's going to
assessment.
get even more complicated. That's my question. I don't know how it's going to be defeated. Thank you.
Sure. And yeah, and I appreciate that insight and that assessment. And at the end of the day, you're correct, because some businesses get incentives for hiring a certain amount of people in the efforts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right. I know ADP, if we have a certain amount, I'm sure there's some incentives. For us being a massive corporation ourselves. So I think as a small business owner, you want to get the right people in that can do the job for you. What that looks like, I'd like to hope everyone, is open, but like, as you mentioned, it's very easy to segment those things, even in all applications, right? They ask me, am I Hispanic, Latino, or Native American? I'm sure that if I say yes to those things, then that may incentivize a business to, look at hiring someone more than, white, Black, or brown person. So those are unfortunately questions for congressmen, senators, and higher ups there. My job is to get the information out and kind of show what ADP has to offer there. So I do appreciate that insight. All right. Did anybody have any other questions, or we're good to go? All right. And like I said, I'll send this all out, because there's a lot in here, and I'll be conscious of time here, but it looks like we have a little bit more. So as when it comes to recruiting, consider a variety of different sources for recruiting. I know some people use ZipRecruiter, Indeed. Some people might even hire a staffing agency. I think their recommendation here is to try to diversify those things. I know a lot of times, if you're really starting out, sometimes it's word of mouth. I know that's what my father did for his landscaping company. He had one good guy. He's like, anybody else? Some businesses even institute a referral bonus, right? Say, hey, I'll give you $500, your next paycheck if you get somebody in here and they're here longer than a month or two. Right. So incentivizing existing employees to find other qualified candidates within their network can also help when you're looking to go on a hiring spree as well. All right. This is case by case, obviously, depending on the industry. But, when you're conducting an interview, obviously you want to make sure that you're asking the right questions and you have a process in place. If it's a virtual role, obviously this won't be in person, but these are just some good tips and tricks. Make sure you're reviewing what they send in, explain the role, describing the day. Another thing that we'll touch on too, but the one thing I want to highlight from the employer standpoint, make sure that they have some questions, right? Because at the end of the day, that's going to be them doing the job. Maybe have some frequently asked questions prepared for yourself. If they're maybe shy or don't have anything prepared, which, between us is kind of something of a red flag. If they don't have any questions, just, hey, I'm ready to go. I don't care. But, make sure that you're listening to their questions and let them know 100% what they're getting into, because that'll help reduce turnover as well. Just from what my experience and what I've seen with some of my clients. All right. Like I said, I'll send this out, but some good ones that we can highlight. Hey, what was your situation at your last job? What you like, what you don't like? obviously, as I mentioned before, do you have any questions for me? What skill would you like to improve over the next, year or two? There's some good ones in here. Obviously, these are relatively vague, but I encourage you all to, when I send this out, take a look at these, maybe include it into your interview process, some of your questions there as well. Or if, hey, let's make it interactive. If you have some good interview questions that you ask people already, throw them in the chat. Maybe some people that they're not listed here, some people use it as their own. If you have one that you really feel like you're confident in. This is very important, if you ask me, when it comes to the hiring, because a lot of times, unless the job can easily be plug and played, and as long as you're able-bodied, you throw in there and you can get the job done. And a good orientation process is very important to make sure that the employee is good to go, knows the policies, has everything they need to be successful, but also so that they can start being efficient once the orientation is completed. So make sure they know start date, make sure they know who they report to, how the hierarchy works, acclimate them to the culture, procedures, and expectations, and then let everybody know we got someone else coming in, especially, of course, the training manager. All right, now we get into some hiring don'ts. All right, this, like I said, this kind of goes back to what we were discussing before, but maybe in more depth. But try not to ask any, illegal questions, so to speak. We'll get into maybe what those look like in the next slides here. All right.
I have a question about that.
Sure.
So, on the flip side,
guys, we're gonna let you go ahead, Stephanie, but we want you guys to put the questions in the chat. But go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah, you got the floor.
Oh, okay. I apologize. I wasn't aware. It was just on my mind really quickly when you were saying that. And I might forget it. But I wanted to know on the flip side, if if you're being interviewed and someone's asking you questions they should not be asking, what is the legal way to handle that?
As an employee, you can, there's politically correct ways to say, hey, I'm not sure if your line of questioning is compliant with certain Department of Labor guidelines or equal opportunity employer regulations. So I respectfully decline, right, to answer. Or there's if you're uncomfortable with a line of questioning as an employee, as someone who's interviewing, there's ways to go about not saying, I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable disclosing that information. How do you mind answering? Do you mind answering how that relates to this role in this position? Right, because then you kind of flipping it back on them, and then hopefully they'll realize that this is offline, off limits line of questioning. Like I said, these tend to be vague just because they have to be. Some of these are case by case. There's a billion different industries out there and types of different corporations and cultures and regulations. But in the next few slides here, we'll go through some specifics, as what is considered not legal to ask, or and I don't even like using the word legal or illegal because there's a gray area there too. So, but if you're asking me personally, in my professional opinion, as someone who's been interviewed and someone who's interviewed, I'd say that's probably the best way to go about it, is to politely decline to answer the question, and if they persist, and then ask how this related to the role and the company. Because oftentimes, if you do feel uncomfortable with the line of questioning, then it probably has nothing to do with the job. Okay. All right. And as I mentioned, we're going through, so these next few will be questions to avoid, and what's off limits, alternative ways to ask for it. But when it comes to disabilities, want to make sure that you're avoiding some of these questions. Here's an example of why it's off limits and it's alternative. I'll go through these relatively quick, just give you a kind of overview of what types of things are considered off limits. And like I said, I'll send the deck out. But off-duty conduct, right? Unless you have a drug policy where you get tested consistently, or in the beginning, you still aren't really even supposed to ask these questions, just because that'll all come out with the screening at the end. All right. This is more of a, I wouldn't say illegal, but just try to avoid, specifically asking their pay history, because that, as a applicant, that could put a bad taste in their mouth too, because the assumption is that you're looking to see how much I made so you can pay me just a little bit more than that and save the company money, instead of paying me what you're going to pay me in the beginning, right? So this is just and this is becoming a lot more prevalent too, with more informed applicants. Like I said, some of this will be obvious, but religious beliefs and practices off limits there should be. Of course, unless you, also, even if you do even if you do run a religious organization, it would be preferable if the applicants believe the same thing, but I'm sure legally that's not a necessity. Age, whether young, old, do you plan to retire soon, is an interesting interview question, but just keep that in mind. National origin, we touched on that, but federal and many state laws do prohibit discrimination due to nation of origin. So whether you're not born in America, or what your ethnic background is. Practicing marital status or family status is another one. There's some good questions to avoid. All right. Like I said, you all have access to this. I know I'm kind of going through these relatively quick, but got a couple other things to touch on. And as you can already see, there's a lot that goes into hiring. We haven't even talked about onboarding or the other human resource thing, but this tends to be, I wanted to make sure I had a bunch of slides on hiring, simply because this tends to be, especially now, a very challenging thing for a lot of businesses, and small businesses especially. Small African-American businesses even more so. So I wanted to make sure that, one, you had the information as to what your options are, what other people maybe have run into the difficulties, but also especially these, to make sure that you're not, being sued for discrimination or wrongful termination or anything like that. If you're doing things right on the front end, you never have to worry about that on the back end. So unless you do a background check, if that's standard policy for the business, then maybe want to stay away from these questions as well. All right. When it comes to these things, I think this should be relatively straightforward. Even though it may be helpful to know, you just can't outright ask people, about some of their past, unless you do a full screening for the job.
Trevor, we have a question in chat.
Sure.
It says, please discuss the concept of safe space that millennials and Gen Alphas are often concerned about and will ask as they're hired. I'm not familiar with that term. Are you familiar? If not, Faye, pipe in it.
Sorry, you cut out a little bit there, Ken, but the question I heard was, could you talk a little bit more about safe space and something that millennials were, and that I didn't hear the last part.
Yeah, Faye, can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm in technology, obviously. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. And there's a women in tech, or women who code. And I was listening to a webinar, and because of technology, when they code, they don't want to be stressed out. So they want the employer to provide safe spaces within the office for them to feel safe and secure, because they don't want to be stressed out when it comes to writing code. They don't want the demands of a deadline to impact their psyche, if you will, or their
Yeah.
comfort zone. So you might need them to do Python or C++ or meet a customer or federal government deadline when it comes to technology and writing code and software analysis, which is a very rigorous type of job. And you know that they're coming out of high school knowing how to code now. They don't have to go to college anymore.
Yeah.
But because their skill set might be in demand, you need them and they know it. But the demand is, how do you give me a safe space? Safe space is more important sometimes than the salary or the amount
Yeah.
they're getting paid because they live at home. So,
Yeah.
but they need
Yeah.
a safe space and they don't like sitting in an office space with other people or feeling like they don't belong or they're not whatever the case might be, or somebody might have said the wrong pronoun and all of a sudden that's a threatening behavior because somebody may not have necessarily called them by their name, but they might have said the wrong pronoun. And all of a sudden that's unsafe. They're not insecure and they want to quit. And so when you have to hire again, it's more cost and more recruiting, then it impacts your delivery to the client. So how do you overcome that if you're in the tech space? I will listen.
And
Hopefully
can-
that's
and
clear.
Can I
Thank you.
piggyback on that, please? This is going to become a bigger issue because even in the school system, Loudoun County just reported that schools are being asked to create a safe space with fidget spinners and things of that nature so that if the kids are in school and they get stressed, they can go off and do whatever they need to do to calm down. So it's an environment that they are becoming accustomed to, even in a school setting. And so when you get to the workplace, as she pointed out, you can anticipate it being something of a demand.
And these are very
Correct.
important issues, especially moving forward, as you mentioned, with the next crop of working age individuals. I think your answer will be expanded upon, or your question will be expanded upon when we head into the employer handbook a little bit more. But what I can say now, not to jump ahead of that, is if the requirement is to be in office, it really comes, especially in the tech space, which has pioneered, quote unquote, fun office, where they have ping pongs and, beer on tap and things like that. And I think the reason for that is because the job can be extremely mentally demanding. We're maybe working long hours, or you're just looking behind a computer in a dark room for extended periods of time. I think building upon the company culture, which is another thing we'll touch on at the end, helps people feel more comfortable. And also, so just two-pronged. They understand the company policy, how the company is structured for all individuals, and what things are put in place to help them be comfortable and do the best job, and also feel safe, comfortable in their own work environment. Then that's step one. In practice, though, and that goes into the company culture, you actually have to do that, right? So, that comes with being consistent with internal recognition. Some people, prefer that over, pizza parties and stuff like that, right? So that if you have certain things in place for the company to keep these, preferred employers or top producing employees happy and comfortable, then you have to be consistent with those and actually have to have things in place. Now that's case by case, depending on the industry, obviously budgetary restrictions. And even if you do have an office space, how do you maximize that to make sure that people aren't sitting on top of each other and, feel stressed all the time. But at the end of the day, you also have to make it very clear, and maybe I just sound, this may be an older thought, but you have to make it very clear that you're here to do a job, and you have a function, and that job a lot of times may have deadlines, and if you're feeling stressed, I will hear what you have to say, and if I need to make adjustments to maybe offload some things, maybe if you have too much on your plate, or maybe I need to hire somebody else so that the team doesn't feel overwhelmed, you have to be open to those conversations and be willing to make those changes. But the worst thing you can do is not hear that, because the next thing you know, you have a mass exodus, and now you have to hire 3, 4, 5 people, and everything's delayed. Right. So that's what I'll say on that now before we go into more detail with company culture and employer handbook. But that is going to be more of a piece, because now employees are becoming more informed. They're talking to each other about pay. They're doing everything and anything, and it's a little bit more difficult to stay ahead of those things as an employer. Hopefully,
Well, it's going to impact your bottom line, because to accommodate all those individual needs and wants, it's going to affect your ability to be profitable. And this is why a lot of these, like you said, this new group of people that are working want remote only work. They don't want to have to go into an office, because there's an inability to be social, or they haven't developed social skills to work as a team or in an office space or things like that. And it's very intimidating. And they have these skills because that's the skill that you need, but they're too afraid to come in to a workspace. So I don't know if your presentation is going to help us as small business owners to address that, but it's like, help. I mean, what are you going to do? AI is here, but you still need people to come in and do those algorithms and code and ask the right questions of artificial intelligence. So I don't know. It's a challenge. Thanks.
Yeah, and I know that's a relatively industry specific question there. And I think this particular slide is more vague to that knowledge. I didn't have, like, that's another, we can do another hour specifically on that, return to work and things like that, right? So, I can definitely look out for some collateral, which I'm sure ADP has, on specifically how to address that, and maybe some tips and tricks on those as well, and maybe send that to you on a one-off for sure.
Trevor, I don't know how many slides you have, but you have about 15 minutes left.
Yeah, I've been keeping an eye on that. But yeah, we'll fit everything in. All right. Like I said, this goes without saying. Don't make assumptions when it comes to hiring and things like that, or try not to. All right, and this is also very, very, very important as well. New hire paperwork. A lot of times this can be digital, especially with the I-9 having a
You went on
updated
silent.
version.
We can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
I could hear him.
I can hear him. Yeah. I
Now,
would say I
think up. Now we can hear you.
okay. Well, thank you. Yeah. All right. So yeah, the new hire paperwork is very, very important. Some states and local jurisdictions require specific ones, but the big ones typically, I-9, make sure they're able to work in the United States, and the W-4, make sure you're keeping on top of their withholdings and any special deductions they may have and things like that as well. Fun fact, if you're still doing these paper, or having these, print out in paper and putting them in file cabinets, which some people do, make sure they're not in the same file cabinet. That is, if you get audited, that is a hefty fine per employee. So they need to be separated. A lot of times people keep them in the digital, what do you call it, doc vault or something of that nature, with whatever their ACM platform is. But if you're doing those paper, fun fact, don't keep those two in the same file cabinet. All right. All right. And please don't forget about wage compliance. If you're paying under minimum wage, don't do that. If you're not paying overtime, don't do that. But I'm not the police, so just a helpful. All right. So next most important thing is employee handbook. Everyone should have one, and it makes your life a lot easier for the employer. Really protects you, and the employee gives them an idea of what the company's policies are, and make sure they acknowledge that. So we'll go quickly through this, and then we'll touch on company culture and very briefly on benefits, just to fit in the time. All right. Why is it important? As I just mentioned, it protects you, and it gives your employees, the full run through of how things work at the business. All right. Now, how do you create one? Really, what your options are there. A lot of people do have a lawyer create one for them. Now, I will warn you, sometimes they can be as low as $500 to I've even seen, $7,500 on the high end, anywhere in that range to create a brand new employee handbook to make sure it's compliant with any state and federal legislations. And even if you have industry specific rules that need to be included there, a lot of times they'll do that for you too. You do have other options though. For example, I mentioned it's not a commercial, but I know ADP on our HR platform, they have a wizard where you can create one through our platform as well. So where you don't need a lawyer or don't have to pay any extra money or anything like that. So those are kind of the two main things I see, whether they're using ADP or a competitor of ours to kind of have us just work with them to build one out. Some HR specialists, I know there's some HR industry specific HR businesses that help with these, or you can go through a lawyer. All right. What is important to include? You can read that, but there are no laws that require employees to maintain certain policies in writing. So just to give you a forewarning, it's always recommended, but you won't be sued if you don't have one. All right, we'll quickly go through these. Make sure you have the proper disclaimers in the employer handbook. Should be large and in bold font for sure. Equal employment opportunity policy. So this protects you, but make sure that you prohibit retaliation for any employees, urge them to report the instance of any discrimination. Just want to make sure that the proper wording is in the handbook. Like I said, especially now is what we talked about, where people are becoming more educated and maybe some things that they'll let slide in the past when they didn't know about, certain rights that they have as employees and things like that, they will sue now. Let's just say that I've seen too many cases where people are very quick to be litigious. And that obviously is not something that anyone wants to deal with, especially when what you're doing is not illegal. But if you have this in place, the employer handbook, and then you also have their acknowledgement, whether it be physical or electronic, they really don't have a case. Now, we're seeing this more and more with other states where, for example, California, New York, your businesses are required to even have trainings on sexual harassment in the workplace, right? So you want to make sure you have something on that. Obviously, some of these things are going to be very obvious. Of course, you're going to fire if you're sexually harassing some people. But if you don't have it in their employer handbook and, they kind of wiggle around the specifics of what happened, you'll be surprised how some people can get out of these certain things or even leave with a settlement from the business itself for a wrongful termination. So some of these things in the employer handbook may seem obvious, but they're very, very important to at least have an excerpt on, right? Now, consider certain state laws, like I mentioned, California, New York, and I'm sure there are bills that are being introduced to add them to other states, but there are going to be a lot more compliance risks as a small business. So you're always going to want to keep an eye on that.
Trevor, I have a question. So these policies that you're recommending, are these for if you have at least, if you have one employee, do you still need to have these? Do you recommend these things still be in place? And is there a difference between a handbook for contractors versus W-2s, 1099s versus W-2?
Yeah. So what you'll see is a lot of times people have the employer handbook for W-2s, and if you do hire a consistent or even a large group of contractors as well, they'll have a separate one for the contractors. If you don't have too many contractors, but they do exist, a lot of times in the contracted agreement, some a lot of the company policies will be added, not obviously as much as a full employer handbook, but since they're not technically employees of the business, they're bound to the contract agreement that you have for them, right, for the service that they're offering. But you'll see, for example, I have a client out of I'm just blanked what county they're in Maryland, but I have a client where they have 10 W-2 employees, but they also employ like 40 1099s throughout the state consistently. So they had to have two separate ones for the contractors and the W-2s. But that's like a case by case basis. That's what some other people do. Typically, if you have the main one, then that can encompass everybody unless you have specific contract work that's pretty consistent.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, this is very important. I got a perfect example. I see you got about, call it a few minutes left, but you'll be surprised how many people can wiggle around this one in particular. Conduct, attendance, uniform, all that needs to be in the employer handbook, simply because they'll try if they can get away with something, especially when it comes time for termination. If they really want to look deep enough, they'll look at the job description, they'll look at the employer handbook, they'll see any way they can wiggle around that. I had a client who had to fire one of their drivers because they were drinking beer at lunchtime, and they come back the second half of the day and be tipsy. And the person said when they were terminated, I didn't know I couldn't drink on lunch. I'm off the clock. You might want to add conduct policy into the employer handbook. So it means you'll hear some crazy situations, but these are all here to protect yourself. Classifications, what job titles, full-time, who's exempt, who's not exempt. Leave, this is an important one, especially you're hearing some businesses offer unlimited PTO now. It's very important to specify what unlimited actually means. How things use it or lose it, if what the maternity, paternity leave policies are, those are very important.
Go back one. So this one,
Yeah.
this one I've seen has become not an issue, but conversation. So now I'm seeing that a lot of employers, there may be holidays that are federal holidays, and those employers are not observing those. So they're putting in the handbook how they're responding to that. So, i.e., you may get so many hours off, but we're going to be working on MLK Day or Indigenous Day or whatever that may be. So that this has come up quite a bit in conversation lately.
Especially as of Monday, I was personally working on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, but I'm sure that's in my employer handbook somewhere.
Oh yeah, Juneteenth, MLK, Indigenous, and so people are.
Veterans Day.
Some folks are thinking, I get this day because it's a national holiday, and then employers are saying we're not giving you this day, but we're going to compensate or mitigate that by you now have optional leave or whatever. So that needs to be spelled out. If you expect them, if you're used to working on MLK Day or Juneteenth or whatever, and you expect your folks to come in, that needs to be spelled out that they're not getting all of the national holidays off.
Agree. And maybe even go a step further and, sending out an acknowledgement, if that is something that you've had issues with in the past, people just not showing up on Martin Luther King Day just because, all their friends don't have it and they assume that they have it and they didn't read the employee handbook. Make sure to send out a notice, hey, everyone is working, coming in on Monday. So please don't not be here. All right, thank you. Good again. This is relatively straightforward. Make sure they explain how to clock in and clock out. That's written out. This is pay frequencies, when the paydays are. If one's fall on a holiday, make sure what the policy is, when you actually expect payment and things like that as well. This is more specific, but how lunchtimes work if you have salaried employees and or what the expectation is to clock in and out for breaks and things like that are. Make sure those are clear. And then the big one, a lot of people had to either redo or update employee handbooks due to COVID-19 and certain regulations, whether it be the state, local, or federal policies. You make sure you have to update those and how the business is handling that, which is still around. I know we don't want to believe it or deal with it, but it's still here. You guys can look at this once I send out the deck to Ken and Melissa there, but just some recommendations on what to exclude from the employer handbook. All right, implementing it pretty quick. Make sure that the managers are trained on what specifically is in it, what the policies are, because you don't want to have them tell an employee something and then it gets to you and that's not actually what the policy is. So make sure that they're able to understand it and reciprocate it to employees. Distribute it. You can do it in person. A lot of times you can do it electronically through like a mobile app. That ties in with any payroll platform that you have or any HR functionalities that you have. Make it streamlined through that platform. And then make sure they acknowledge it. So what good is having an employer handbook if the person never signed that they read it or hit confirm that they looked through it? That is the biggest form of protection for a business, because you don't want to have to pay money or spend your time creating one if no one's going to look at it just to say you have one. So that's an important quick add to it too. And make sure you're updating it, right? If you have an employee handbook and you haven't looked at it since 2002, I highly recommend you update that employee handbook, because a lot has changed in 22 years.
Question. So I work for a major corporation, so I was always curious about this. So even if you're reviewing it annually, do you have to have the employees sign it annually? Is that a recommendation? Say if there was no changes made.
Yeah, every time you update the employer handbook, you're supposed to make the acknowledgement. The new employees are supposed to acknowledge the updates made.
So the standard policy is typically a year. Because I always wondered why every year I was re-signing the same document.
Yeah, because they're probably making adjustments for the coming year, maybe updating policies, or could be in your favor, could be in their favor, could be a mixture of both. But a lot of times they're updating, with different regulations, especially if they're like a national organization, then they're probably going to have to definitely do it every year, if not more. All right. And the last two things to touch on really quickly here are company culture. Some things to consider. Are you offering a job, just someone to come in, do their work and leave, or you're offering a career, right? Now that could be case by case depending on the industry, but I think the idea is that you want someone to come in and take it seriously, take ownership of what they're doing, even if it's just a $16 an hour part-time job. You want those people to feel comfortable and happy to be working for your organization, right? So how do you get them to come in and be excited for it? Well, these are questions for you all, obviously, as a business owners and operators. But if your turnover rate is high, maybe think of different ways you can incentivize people for good work, or recognize people for good work, even if they're the lowest in the totem pole or your seasoned veterans. Want to make sure that everyone wants to come in and excited to come in. Just think about how they would describe their experience working for you, right? Maybe it's a good common practice to do exit interviews when people quit or get terminated. Probably not get terminated, but when people quit, maybe make it a common practice, do an exit interview, ask the hard questions, because a lot of times people are a lot more honest when they're no longer having to come in. So these are some things to consider to improve your company culture. I always recommend taking that into consideration. And lastly, and then we're coming up on time here, didn't have a whole bunch of slides on benefits, simply because I'm not licensed, but that is something that a lot of people are looking forward to. And they're not as expensive as a lot of business owners think. So it's definitely good to look into a broker, whether it be for the health or retirement or short-term, long-term disability, dental, stuff like that. At the very least, look, see how it is. They even have certain things where you can put a little bit of their paycheck, you add a little bit to their pay each month, where they can basically use that for specific health things, so you basically have a health savings account for them, so there are a lot of different avenues other than, the full group health, and a lot of different avenues, instead of like a whole full 401k where you're matching up to 6% and stuff like that. There are a lot of different options, whether it be simple IRA, SEP IRA, and just encourage you to look at it, because that's another thing that'll attract the better candidates, if those things are offered. All right. And lastly, since I do work for ADP, I got to mention some of the things we do to help with these. So the mobile app, we have our HR help desk for specific HR problems. Maybe like the safe space that someone mentioned before, someone can reach out to our SHRM certified health specialist. Hey, how can I assist with this. These people got the highest level of certification for human resources. Background checks, ZipRecruiter, hiring toolkit, HR help desk again. But other than that, I will thank you all for your time. Didn't expect to go the full hour, and look at me, I did it. So
We have a couple of questions. So if you don't mind staying on for a couple of minutes,
yeah,
if folks want to stay on to hear the response to the questions, cool. One of the questions earlier on was, how do you ask for skills demonstrations? I.e., if you have someone like a florist or a chef or a cake decorator, how do you approach that appropriately to have them demonstrate their skills?
Yeah. So sometimes people do what's like a trial first period, right? Now you will still have to pay these people for this day, but you can hire them on a trial basis, right? So say if I'm a florist and you want to make sure that they can do the job, have them come in for a shadow somebody for a shift, and then get their opinion on how they're doing if they can't do the job, and have them try a few things, right? That like a tentative employee. Another thing you could do if it's more like professional services work, I know in certain sales jobs, I've had to do a mock presentation on my second to last or final interview, right, to make sure that I can present, what I know at least of the product, and show that I can do the job. I'd say there's a couple of different. Those are two different things that I can think of off the top of my head. How some businesses have done skills demonstrations in the past, but anything short of having someone come in and say, hey, you have 15 minutes to do this, which is relatively uncommon. A lot of times they'll have them come in. I know, for example, when I bartended in college, I know some bars that had people come in, you say for an hour or 2 hours, and get a feel from the bar, and serve them certain drinks to make sure they can do the job, right? So those are some examples of some businesses have done in the past that I'm aware of.
Okay. Next question. I'm not sure if you have a technical response. This is a debate that's going on nationally, actually probably internationally. Can you discuss the desire of employees to telework or have full remote work, while organizations, specifically the government, are requesting people to come back to work?
Yeah, I can just speak from my experience in the area. We all know that a lot of the office parks are a lot more vacant than they used to be, and it really depends on the industry. Like if I'm more tech, then the ability to telework is a little easier than if I, am working in hauling and logistics and stuff like that, right? I think the overall shift from professional service workers is that there is a good hybrid environment, but also there are some people like myself included who, if the job is 100% remote, then I'm less likely to apply. You just have to, in the interview process, it's very good to ask these questions. Hey, how do you feel about coming into the office 2 times throughout the course of the week, right? And being very intentful with your questions, and also be consistent too. If you hire somebody that's supposed to come in, that the expectation was to come in 2 times throughout the course of the week, and then a few months later you change it to everybody needs to come in all 5 days of the week, they can obviously feel a little betrayed in that instance. But I think that's just good to make sure that you have the proper expectation and communicate effectively if you are making a change with enough notice.
And I think the conversation too, and it's a debate on productivity, accountability. Are you maximizing your production at home, or does it take a team? And does the team concept really work better in a group setting versus in a silo? So I think there's argument that some jobs can be done at home without interaction.
Yeah, I mean, the world didn't shut down during COVID.
But there's a lot that can't. You can't really be a banker in your garage. There's some things you just really got to go out and interact with folks and kind of do. So and there's some economy to that too. People have these corporate buildings, and they have resources that are available to their staff, and those resources are not being maximized, and so it's not cost effective. So there's a lot to that debate. Let's see. I think there's one last one, and then I'll let you go. I think the question was, do you have a handbook for independent contractors? You kind of spoke that could be incorporated into the same.
Yeah, and there could even be a section in the main one specifically for contractors too. So it really depends on what your contract work looks like for your business and your industry. But the employer handbook is really meant to be customizable specifically for your business.
And I think the key to that too, though, would be folks, and we maybe will do a webinar on this. I think people really need to understand the difference between 1099 and W-2, because the handbook for 1099 looks a lot different.
Yeah.
Because by definition, there's certain things you can't tell a 1099 to do. You can't tell them what time to take a break, and so on and so forth. So there's some legal stuff that you need to make sure that you're experts in. And I think, yes, you're going to get a copy of this. Yes, the slides will be available. And so, Trevor, there's another question about 1099 and contract. I think maybe we'll put together another webinar to talk
I
about.
have that. I can send that to you.
And we'll talk about 1099 in all aspects. So maybe we'll do a 1099 versus W-2 series. So we'll come. So guys, we'll come back to that for you. Okay. And Trevor, excellent job. And if you think we didn't get everything covered, we could do if this was HR 101, we could look at an HR 102 or HR or HR.
There's a lot more we can go into.
MBA or PhD. Thank you guys. Again, if there's information that you didn't get that you need more of, put it in the chat. I am always looking at opportunities to provide you guys with the resources that you need, you guys being our members and our small business community. So if we need to go deeper, do a deeper dive on something and you didn't get enough information or you need to get more information, please let us know and we'll do part 2, part 3, PhD, whatever we need to make sure that we're getting all the information to help you guys in your success. And with that being said, Prince George's County, we have a happy hour next week at Sobeys next Thursday. And stay tuned for all of our webinars. You should be getting another email blast tomorrow with all of our upcoming webinars. And for that, thank you. And thank you, Trevor.